Sir, I'm giving you a lawful order. Stand up and leave the building. Now.
I'm not loitering. I'm a paying customer and this is my property.
Don't argue with me. You don't belong here.
Officer, you're about to arrest the owner of this building.
Last warning. Hands behind your back.
You're violating my Fourth Amendment right.
Officer Miller was 29 years old with 5 years on the force and a reputation in his precinct for being proactive, a code word that often meant aggressive. He had been patrolling the downtown district responding to a generic call about loitering in the area, not the coffee shop specifically, but the general block. When he entered the lobby, his eyes scanned the room and landed immediately on Marcus. The coffee shop was quiet, occupied mostly by young professionals on laptops and a few business meetings. Marcus was the only black man in the seating area. Miller adjusted his duty belt, his hand brushing against his baton, and walked straight toward the corner table. He didn't survey the rest of the room. He didn't ask the barista if there were any issues. He had already decided that Marcus Thorne did not belong there. "Excuse me," Miller said, his voice loud enough to cut through the low hum of conversation in the shop. Marcus didn't look up immediately. He finished making a notation in the margin of a contract, capped his pen, and then slowly raised his eyes. He looked at the officer over the rim of his reading glasses. "Can I help you?" "Officer," Marcus asked, his voice a deep, cultivated baritone that had commanded silence in federal courtrooms for years. Miller didn't like the tone. It wasn't fearful. It wasn't submissive. It was the voice of an equal, and that irritated him. "We've had reports of loitering in the building," Miller stated, stepping closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "This establishment is for paying customers only." Marcus glanced at the porcelain cup on his table, then back at the officer. "I am a paying customer," Marcus said calmly, "and I am currently finishing my coffee and my work. Is there a problem?" Miller looked at the cup. It was half empty. "You can't just buy one cup of coffee and sit here all day," Miller said, shifting his stance. "How long have you been here?" Marcus checked his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe. "Approximately 20 minutes. Is there a time limit posted that I missed? Or is there a specific statute regarding coffee consumption duration that you are enforcing?" The sarcasm, however polite, hit Miller like a slap. He wasn't used to being questioned, certainly not by men who looked like Marcus. "Don't get smart with me," Miller snapped. "I'm telling you to move along. You're taking up a table that could be used for other customers." Marcus looked around the shop. There were at least 6 empty tables. The barista behind the counter had stopped wiping down the espresso machine and was watching, looking uncomfortable. "Officer," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, "there are plenty of seats. The management has not asked me to leave. I am disturbing no one. I suggest you find something more productive to do with your time." Miller's face reddened. He felt the eyes of the other patrons on him. A young woman at a nearby table had lowered her laptop screen. A man in a suit by the window was watching intently. Miller needed to assert control. He couldn't walk away now. It would look like weakness. "I'm determining that you are trespassing," Miller said, his voice rising. "I am giving you a lawful order to vacate the premises immediately. If you don't leave, I will arrest you." Marcus stared at him, a look of profound disbelief crossing his face. "Trespassing," Marcus repeated. "You are arresting me for trespassing in this building." "That's right," Miller said, hand resting on his handcuffs. "Last chance. Get up and walk out or you're going out in cuffs." Marcus sighed, a sound of deep exhaustion. He had fought these battles in the 1980s. He had fought them in the 1990s. He couldn't believe he was still fighting them on a Tuesday morning in 2024. "Officer, before you do something that will end your career, I strongly suggest you check your facts. I am not trespassing." Marcus reached toward his leather briefcase on the floor to retrieve the documents that would clarify the situation. "Don't reach for anything," Miller shouted, his hand flying to his holster. "Hands on the table. Now!" The sudden aggression startled the entire room. The barista gasped. Marcus froze his hands, hovering inches above the table before he slowly placed them flat on the surface. I am reaching for my identification and proof of my right to be here, Marcus said, speaking very slowly and clearly for the benefit of the witnesses. I am unarmed. I am an attorney, and you are making a grave error. Miller wasn't listening. The adrenaline of the confrontation had taken over. In his mind, the refusal to immediately obey was a threat. The attempt to reach into a bag was a potential weapon. He saw a suspect, not a citizen. Stand up, Miller ordered. Turn around. Hands behind your back. I am trying to help you avoid a lawsuit, Marcus said, not moving. If you look in my bag, you will see. I said stand up. Miller grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and yanked him out of the chair. The chair scraped loudly against the marble floor, a harsh screech that silenced the room completely. Marcus didn't resist the physical pull. He stood up, maintaining his dignity even as he was being manhandled. He turned around slowly. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights. Marcus stated, his voice devoid of fear, filled only with a cold legal precision. You have no probable cause for this arrest. There is no complainant. The owner of the property has not asked for my removal. I'm the police, Miller grunted, twisting Marcus's arms behind his back. I'm the complainant. He slapped the handcuffs on Marcus's wrists. The metal clicked shut tight, too tight. Marcus winced slightly but didn't cry out. Officer, Marcus said, remember this moment. Remember that I gave you a chance to look at the paperwork. Miller ignored him, pushing him toward the door. You can tell it to the judge, Miller said dismissively. The irony of that statement hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. As they walked through the lobby, Marcus saw at least 3 people filming with their smartphones. He made eye contact with the young woman who had been sitting near him. She looked terrified, but kept her phone steady. Marcus gave her an almost imperceptible nod. Record it, the nod said. Capture everything. Miller marched Marcus out the front revolving doors and onto the busy sidewalk. The bright morning sun hit them. Passers-by stopped and stared. A well-dressed black man in handcuffs being led away by a young white officer. It was an image that was all too familiar, a visual shorthand for a system that had been broken for generations. Miller led him to the patrol car parked in the loading zone. He shoved Marcus against the hood, patting him down roughly. He pulled Marcus's wallet out of his pocket, looked at the driver's license, and tossed it onto the dashboard of the car without really reading it. He just wanted to get the guy in the back seat. Watch your head, Miller said, not offering any assistance as Marcus had to maneuver his tall frame into the cramped back seat of the cruiser while cuffed. The door slammed shut. Marcus sat in the hard plastic seat, the smell of stale sweat and disinfectant filling his nose. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He wasn't scared. He was calculating. He was drafting the opening paragraph of the complaint in his mind. Miller got into the driver's seat, breathing heavily. He felt a rush of satisfaction. He had removed the problem. He had asserted authority. He picked up the radio. Dispatch 1 in custody. Trespassing and failure to comply. En route to the station. He didn't look back at Marcus. He didn't ask if the cuffs were too tight. He turned on the ignition and pulled into traffic. The ride to the precinct took 15 minutes. Neither man spoke. Miller hummed along to the radio. Marcus sat in silence, looking out the window at the city he had helped build, the city that was now treating him like a criminal. When they arrived at the precinct, Miller pulled Marcus out of the car and led him into the booking area. It was a busy morning. Phones were ringing, officers were typing reports, and the air was thick with tension. The desk sergeant was Thomas Kowalski, a 58-year-old veteran who was 2 years away from retirement. Kowalski had seen it all. He was tired, he was cynical, but he was fair. He looked up over his glasses as Miller approached with his prisoner. Kowalski's eyes went wide. He stopped chewing his gum. He stood up slowly behind the high desk. Miller, Kowalski said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. What in God's name are you doing? Miller looked confused. Booking him, Sarge. Trespassing at the Plaza Tower on 4th. refused to leave. Kowalski looked at Marcus, then back at Miller. He looked like he was watching a man juggle live grenades. "Do you know who this is?" Kowalski asked. "Yeah, guy wouldn't give a name, but I got his ID. Marcus Thorne." "Mr. Thorne," Kowalski said, addressing Marcus, directly ignoring Miller. "I am incredibly sorry. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Sergeant," Marcus said calmly. "Though these cuffs are cutting off my circulation and your officer here refused to check my identification properly." Kowalski came around the desk himself. "Uncuff him, now." Miller hesitated. "Sarge, he was uncooperative. He was—" "Uncuff him." Kowalski roared a sound that made the entire room freeze. Miller fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking slightly as he realized he had missed something huge. The cuffs clicked open. Marcus rubbed his wrists where red, angry lines had formed. "Miller," Kowalski said, his face turning a shade of purple. "You arrested Marcus Thorne for trespassing at the Plaza Tower." "Yes, Sarge. He was just sitting there loitering." "You idiot," Kowalski hissed. "Marcus Thorne owns the Plaza Tower. He bought the entire building last week. It was in the paper. It was on the news." The silence that followed was absolute. Miller looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back, his expression unreadable. He owns the building," Miller stammered. "I tried to tell you." Marcus said, his voice smooth as silk but sharp as a razor. "I tried to reach for the deed of sale in my briefcase. You told me to keep my hands on the table. I told you that you were making a mistake. You told me to tell it to the judge." Marcus stepped closer to Miller, towering over him. "I don't need to tell it to a judge, Officer Miller. I am the landlord. I was drinking coffee in my own lobby, and you just arrested me for trespassing on my own property." Miller's face drained of color. He looked at the sergeant, looking for a lifeline, but there was none. I didn't know," Miller whispered. "Ignorance of the facts is not a defense for violating constitutional rights," Marcus said, "especially when the facts were offered to you and you refused to look at them." The precinct captain, Captain Henderson, came out of his office, drawn by the commotion. He took one look at Marcus Thorne rubbing his wrists and the terrified look on Miller's face, and he knew his day was ruined. "Mr. Thorne," the captain said, extending a hand, "please come into my office. Let's resolve this." "No, Captain," Marcus said, ignoring the hand. "I don't think we will be resolving this in an office. I think we will resolve this in federal court." He picked up his belongings from the counter, his wallet, his watch, his fountain pen. He checked the pen to make sure it wasn't damaged. "I am leaving now. I assume I am free to go." "Of course," the captain said. "Mr. Thorne, please let us apologize. This was a terrible misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Marcus said, turning to look at Miller one last time. "It was a choice. It was a pattern. And it is going to be a very expensive lesson." Marcus walked out of the precinct, head high back straight. He didn't look back. He hailed a taxi and went straight to his law firm. He didn't go home to rest. He didn't call his wife yet. He went to his office, gathered his 3 best senior associates, and said, "Drop everything. We are filing a civil rights lawsuit against the city and Officer Kyle Miller, and I want it filed by close of business today." By 5:00 p.m., the lawsuit was filed. Thorne v. Miller and the City of Chicago. The complaint was 40 pages long, single-spaced. It detailed the unlawful stop, the unlawful detention, the excessive force, the false arrest, and the violation of the 14th Amendment. It asked for $3.4 million in damages, $400,000 for the city's negligence, and $3 million in punitive damages against the police department to force a policy change. But the legal filing was just the beginning. The video from the coffee shop hit the internet at 6:00 p.m. The young woman who had recorded it uploaded it to Twitter with the caption, "Cop arrests owner of the building for drinking coffee while black." It went viral instantly. By the next morning, it had 10 million views. The image of the distinguished older man being handcuffed while trying to explain he owned the place resonated with everyone. It was absurd, it was cruel, and it was undeniable. The media storm was relentless. News trucks camped out in front of the Plaza Tower. They camped out in front of the precinct. They dug into Officer Miller's background, and what they found was disturbing. Marcus's legal team had hired private investigators who found that this wasn't Miller's first time. There were 6 prior complaints against him for similar stops. In every case, the subject was a black man over the age of 40. In every case, Miller had claimed they were loitering or suspicious. The department had dismissed the complaints as unfounded. But now, with the spotlight of a $3.4 million lawsuit and a viral video, those old complaints looked very different. The internal affairs investigation was swift and brutal. They couldn't protect Miller this time. The union representative told Miller, "You arrested Marcus Thorne. You arrested the guy who wrote the book on police misconduct litigation in this state. There is nothing we can do for you." The investigation revealed that Miller had bypassed department policy on escalating encounters. It showed he had no reasonable suspicion. It showed he had ignored exculpatory evidence, the offer to show ID. The city attorney, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, read the file and called the mayor. "We have to settle," she said. "If this goes to a jury with Thorne representing himself, they will give him 10 million, maybe 20. The jury will hate us. The video is indefensible." The mayor agreed. "Cut the check," he said, "and get rid of the officer." 6 months after the arrest, the settlement was announced. The city agreed to pay $3.4 million. It was one of the largest settlements for a single incident of non-violent arrest in the city's history. As part of the settlement, the city admitted wrongdoing, a rare occurrence. Officer Kyle Miller was fired. His termination letter cited gross misconduct, racial profiling, and incompetence. He was stripped of his pension. He would never work in law enforcement again. The state revoked his peace officer certification. But for Marcus Thorne, the money was never the point. He took the check for $3.4 million and deposited it into a new account. The next day, he announced the creation of the Thorne Justice Initiative, a nonprofit legal defense fund dedicated to providing high-quality representation for low-income individuals facing wrongful arrest. He used the city's own money to build a weapon against their misconduct. The story ends where it began, in the lobby of the Plaza Tower. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after the arrest. Marcus Thorne sat at the same corner table. The sun was streaming in through the glass. He had his double espresso and his documents. The barista brought him a refill without him asking. The atmosphere was peaceful, but things had changed. There was a new security protocol in the building, one that Marcus had designed himself. It emphasized respect and de-escalation. Marcus put down his pen and looked out the window. He watched the police cruisers drive by outside. He knew that for every Kyle Miller he removed, there was another one waiting. He knew that his suit and his money and his deed to the building hadn't saved him from the humiliation of that day. Only his knowledge of the law and his ability to fight back had saved him in the aftermath. He thought about the men who didn't own buildings, the men who didn't have law degrees, the men who got arrested in coffee shops and lost their jobs because they couldn't make bail. He felt a heavy sadness mix with his victory. He took a sip of his coffee. It tasted bitter, but it kept him awake. And he needed to be awake. There was still so much work to do. Have you ever been judged or profiled based on how you look? Do you think the settlement was enough to change the system? Drop a comment below and share your story. Your voice matters in this conversation. And if you believe in justice, hit that subscribe button to support more stories like this. We'll see you in the next one.
Step away from the door, now! Drop the tool!
This is my home. I have a key. You are trespassing on protected curtilage.
Don't get smart with me, I don't believe you live here.
You are detaining a black homeowner without probable cause. That is unconstitutional.
Turn around, hands behind your back!
I am complying under protest. This arrest is illegal and it will end your career.
The body camera footage was crystal clear, capturing the crisp morning sunlight filtering through the oak trees of the historic district. Officer Kyle Braden had no idea that the dash cam of his cruiser and the lens on his chest were recording the final moments of his law enforcement career. He didn't know that the 63-year-old woman standing on the porch of the Victorian brownstone holding a pair of gardening shears and a brass key was not a burglar. She was not the help. She was the Honorable Eleanor Vance, a senior judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, a woman who had spent 30 years interpreting the Constitution, striking down overreaching executive orders, and defining the limits of police power. And she was about to become the plaintiff in a lawsuit that would bankrupt the city's liability insurance and rewrite the police manual from cover to cover. Before we unpack this infuriating display of arrogance and the justice that followed, I need you to take a second. Scroll down and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, city, state, or country. And if you believe that a person's home is their castle and that the police have no right to trespass without cause, hit that subscribe button. You are going to want to see how this ends. Judge Eleanor Vance had earned her quiet Tuesday mornings. At 63, she had a reputation in the federal judiciary as a legal titan, brilliant, uncompromising, and deeply protective of civil liberties. She had been appointed by the president 2 decades ago, confirmed unanimously by the Senate, and had authored majority opinions that were taught in law schools from Harvard to Stanford. On this particular morning, however, she wasn't wearing her judicial robes. She was wearing worn-in denim overalls, a sun hat, and sturdy gardening gloves. She had spent the last hour deadheading the prized hydrangeas that lined the walkway of her 3-story brownstone in the city's most affluent historic neighborhood. She had purchased the home 15 years ago with the proceeds from her years as a partner at a top-tier litigation firm. It was her sanctuary. She had finished her work in the garden and walked up the 6 stone steps to her front door. She removed her gloves, tucked them into her back pocket, and retrieved her house key from the small pocket on the front of her overalls. That was the moment Officer Kyle Braden's patrol car screeched to a halt at the curb. Braden was 29 years old, with just 4 years on the force. He had requested the historic district patrol because he liked the quiet, but he had a habit of hunting for trouble where there was none. He saw a black woman in working clothes on the porch of a $2 million home, fiddling with the lock, and his bias immediately filled in the blanks. He didn't see a homeowner. He saw a suspect. Braden slammed his cruiser door and sprinted across the manicured lawn, his hand resting instinctively on the grip of his service pistol. He didn't announce himself. He didn't wave. He shouted, "Hey, you step away from the door." Eleanor paused the key halfway into the lock. She turned slowly, her demeanor calm, her face perplexed. She peered over the rim of her reading glasses at the young man storming up her walkway. "Excuse me," she said, her voice possessing that distinct resonant timbre that had silenced courtrooms for years. "I said step away from the door and drop the tool," Braden barked, referring to the small gardening shears in her left hand. "Officer," Eleanor said, removing the key from the lock but standing her ground. "I am standing on my own porch. These are pruning shears. I am entering my residence. May I ask why you are sprinting across my lawn?" Braden reached the bottom of the steps, breathless and aggressive. "We've had reports of break-ins in this neighborhood. You fit the description of a suspicious individual spotted in the area. I need you to drop the shears and come down here." Eleanor placed the shears gently on a side table on the porch. She did not come down the stairs. She knew the law better than the man shouting at her. She knew that standing on the curtilage of her home, the porch afforded her maximum Fourth Amendment protection. "I am not a suspicious individual," Eleanor stated clearly. "I am the owner of this property. I have the key in my hand. I am asking you to leave my property immediately unless you have a warrant or probable cause that a crime is being committed in your presence." Braden didn't like the tone. He wasn't used to people in work clothes using words like curtilage or probable cause. He was used to submission. "I don't know you live here," Braden sneered, stepping up onto the first step. "I need to see some ID, proof of residence, now." "My identification is inside the house," Eleanor said, pointing to the solid oak door. "On the foyer table. If you allow me to unlock the door, I will retrieve it for you, though I am under no legal obligation to do so, as I am not operating a vehicle nor am I in a public place." Braden shook his head, his face flushing with anger. "No, you're not going inside. For all I know, you're going for a weapon, or you're going to bolt out the back. You stay right there." "So, let me understand your logic, officer," Eleanor said, crossing her arms. "You require proof that I live here. My proof is inside, yet you refuse to let me enter the premises to retrieve the very proof you demand. This is a circular argument that lacks any legal standing. I am going to unlock my door now." Eleanor turned her back to him. It was a dismissal. It was the action of a woman who knew she was right. She inserted the key into the lock. Braden panicked. In his mind, he was losing control of the situation. He leaped up the remaining stairs. As Eleanor turned the key and the heavy latch clicked open, Braden slammed his boot against the bottom of the door, kicking it shut with a resounding boom that shook the door frame. The impact nearly caught Eleanor's fingers. "I said stop!" Braden screamed, grabbing Eleanor by the shoulder of her overalls and yanking her backward. The neighborhood was quiet, but it wasn't empty. Across the street, Dr. Marcus Aris, a retired dentist who had lived in the district for 40 years, had been watching from his study window. When he saw the officer sprint across the lawn, he had stepped out. When he saw the officer kick the door, he pulled out his phone. He was now filming from the edge of his driveway, capturing the entire scene in high definition. "I'm recording," Dr. Aris shouted. "That is Judge Vance. What are you doing?" Braden ignored the neighbor. He was focused on Eleanor, who had stumbled back but caught her balance. She wasn't fearful. She was furious. The calm judge was gone. The federal authority had arrived. "Officer," she said, her voice dropping an octave, deadly serious. "You have just committed an assault. You have trespassed on private property. You have violated the sanctity of a private dwelling without a warrant. Do not touch me again." "You are detained," Braden yelled, grabbing her arm again harder this time. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Eleanor didn't fight him physically. She knew that resisting arrest, even an unlawful one, gave them the excuse they needed to use lethal force. But she fought him with the record. "I am not resisting." She spoke loudly, clearly, for the microphone she knew was recording. "I am complying under duress. This officer is arresting me on the porch of my own home for the crime of unlocking my front door. This is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. This is a violation of Peyton v. New York. There are no exigent circumstances." "Shut up," Braden snapped. He spun her around, violently wrenching her arms behind her back. The handcuffs ratcheted tight, too tight. The metal bit into the skin of her wrists. Eleanor winced, but didn't cry out. "Officer," she said, her face pressed against the wood of her own front door. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I am a senior judge for the United States Court of Appeals. You are making a mistake that will cost this city millions." Braden laughed. It was a nervous, arrogant laugh. "Yeah, right. And I'm the police commissioner. You're a judge in overalls, tell it to the booking officer." He hauled her off the porch. He didn't walk her. He marched her. Down the stone steps she had just swept past the hydrangeas she had just pruned. Neighbors were coming out now. Mrs. Higgins from next door clutching her robe. The landscaping crew 2 houses down. They all watched in stunned silence as the pillar of their community was shoved toward a patrol car like a common criminal. "Officer, please check her pocket," Dr. Aris yelled from across the street. "She has the key. It fits the door. Just try the key." Braden ignored him. He opened the back door of his cruiser and pushed Eleanor inside. The hard plastic seat was unforgiving. The interior smelled of stale sweat and industrial cleaner. As the door slammed shut, sealing her in, Eleanor, Vance, closed her eyes for a brief moment. She wasn't praying. She was memorizing. She was filing away every sensation, every word, every second of the timeline. She was preparing the brief in her head. Have you ever seen an authority figure so blinded by bias that they refuse to see the truth right in front of them? Type yes in the comments if this sounds familiar. Braden got into the driver's seat, adrenaline pumping. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch, I've got one in custody. Resisting failure to identify suspicion of burglary. Transport to Central." He glanced in the rearview mirror. Eleanor was sitting perfectly upright, staring through the mesh cage with a gaze that could peel paint. She didn't say a word. She didn't ask to be let go. She didn't beg. She just watched him. It was unnerving. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. Braden played music loudly, some aggressive talk radio show trying to drown out the silence from the back seat. He was trying to convince himself he had made a good caller. She was suspicious, he told himself. She wouldn't show ID. She tried to flee into the house. He rehearsed his report in his head, twisting the facts to fit his narrative. Suspect attempted to retreat into an unsecured structure. Officer feared presence of weapons. It was the standard boilerplate language used to justify bad stops. They arrived at the Central Precinct. Braden pulled into the sally port. He hauled Eleanor out of the car. "Let's go, Your Honor," he mocked, emphasizing the title with a sneer. He walked her into the processing area. It was busy. Phones ringing, officers typing reports, the hum of fluorescent lights. Braden walked her up to the desk. The desk sergeant was Thomas Miller, a 55-year-old veteran who was 2 years away from retirement. Miller had seen it all. He looked up, expecting to see a drunk or a shoplifter. Instead, he saw a dignified older black woman in gardening clothes, handcuffed with a look of terrifying calm on her face. "What you got, Braden?" Miller asked, leaning back in his chair. "Burglary suspect from the historic district," Braden announced loudly. "Caught her trying to jimmy the lock on a brownstone. Refused ID, resisted detention, claimed she lived there, then claimed she was a federal judge." Braden chuckled, looking around for validation from the other officers. Nobody laughed. Miller looked at Eleanor. He looked at her hands. He looked at her posture. He had spent 30 years reading people. This woman wasn't a burglar. "Ma'am," Miller said respectfully. "What is your name?" "My name is Eleanor Vance," she said. "I reside at 420 Oak Street. My identification is in the back pocket of my overalls along with my federal credentials, which this officer refused to check." Miller's eyes narrowed. He looked at Braden. "You didn't check her ID." "She wouldn't give it to me, said it was inside." Braden defended. "She said it's in her pocket," Miller said. He stood up and walked around the desk. "I'm going to check your pocket, ma'am. Is that all right?" "Proceed," Eleanor said. Miller reached into the back pocket of the denim overalls. He pulled out a slim leather wallet. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the driver's license. Eleanor Vance, 420 Oak Street. The photo matched the woman standing before him. The address matched the location of the arrest. Braden's face went pale, but Miller wasn't done. He flipped the flap of the wallet. There, shining under the harsh fluorescent lights, was the gold and blue badge of the United States Federal Judiciary, accompanied by the ID card identifying her as a senior circuit judge. Miller froze. The room seemed to lose all oxygen. He looked at the ID. He looked at Eleanor. Then he looked at Braden with an expression of pure disbelief and pity. "Braden," Miller whispered, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a shout. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" It's a fake," Braden stammered, but his voice cracked. "Anyone can buy a badge online." "That is a federal commission," Miller snapped. "And this is Judge Vance. I've seen her on the news." Miller immediately moved to unlock the handcuffs. Judge Vance, I am so sorry. I am removing these restraints immediately. Leave them on, Eleanor said. Miller stopped a key in the lock. Ma'am? I said leave them on, Eleanor repeated. I want the watch commander to see me in these. I want the chief of police to see me in these. And I want a photographer to document the injuries to my wrists before these are removed. If you take them off now, you are tampering with evidence in a federal civil rights case. Miller swallowed hard. He stepped back. I'm calling the chief. The next 20 minutes were a blur of panicked activity for the police department and absolute stillness for Eleanor Vance. She stood by the booking desk, hands still cuffed behind her back, watching the station melt down. The watch commander, Lieutenant Griggs, came running out of his office, tucking his shirt in. He took one look at Eleanor and looked like he might vomit. He turned on Braden. You arrested a federal judge at her own house. She wouldn't cooperate, Braden shouted, still trying to dig his way out. She was acting suspicious. She was gardening, Griggs yelled back. We have the dispatch log. You called in a suspicious person with no description other than race and location. Chief of Police, Robert Harrison, arrived 12 minutes later. He had driven from a city council meeting running lights and sirens. He burst through the double doors, saw Eleanor, and closed his eyes for a second, composing himself. He walked straight to her. Judge Vance, the chief said, his voice trembling slightly. I am Robert Harrison, Chief of Police. On behalf of this department, I offer my deepest, most sincere apologies. This is a catastrophic failure. Please let us remove the cuffs. You are free to go. We will drive you home. We will handle this. Eleanor looked at him. She didn't smile. Chief Harrison, she said, I am not free to go because you realized I am a judge. I should have been free to go because I was an innocent citizen standing on her own porch. If I were a cashier or a nurse or a teacher, would I still be in these cuffs? Would your officers still be writing a false report about burglary? The chief didn't answer. He couldn't. I want the handcuffs removed only after your crime scene technician photographs my wrists, Eleanor commanded. Then I want a copy of the body camera footage, the dash cam footage, the dispatch audio, and the booking log saved to a hard drive and given to my attorney within the hour. And I want the contact information for this officer's union representative because he is going to need one. The technician was summoned. Flashbulbs popped, capturing the red, raw welts on the judge's skin. Only then were the cuffs removed. Eleanor rubbed her wrists slowly. She refused the ride home. I will call a car, she said. I do not feel safe in a police vehicle. She walked out of the precinct with her head high. Braden was sitting on a bench in the hallway, stripped of his gun and badge, his head in his hands. She didn't even look at him. He was no longer a threat. He was a defendant. The lawsuit was filed 4 days later. Vance vs. the City et al. It was a masterclass in legal writing. It didn't just allege misconduct. It dismantled the entire operational structure of the police department. It cited the Fourth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and federal civil rights statutes. It accused Officer Braden of false arrest, excessive force assault battery, and malicious prosecution. It accused the city of failing to train its officers and of harboring a culture of racial bias. The discovery phase was brutal. Eleanor's legal team subpoenaed Braden's entire disciplinary history. What they found was a pattern that had been ignored for years. Braden had stopped dozens of black residents in the historic district. He had harassed delivery drivers, contractors, and homeowners. There were 6 prior complaints for rudeness and bias. All had been dismissed by Internal Affairs as unfounded. But they couldn't dismiss this. The video from Dr. Aris went viral. The body camera footage was released by the city in a desperate attempt to show transparency, but it only made things worse. The world watched Officer Braden kick the door shut. They heard him mock the judge. They saw the clear, undeniable racism of assuming a black woman in a nice house must be a criminal. The city attorney took one look at the case and told the mayor, "We cannot go to trial. If we put Judge Vance on the stand, the jury will give her the keys to the city. We have to settle." They offered $1 million. Eleanor rejected it. They offered $2 million. She rejected it. "It's not about the money," she told her lawyer. "It's about the number. The number has to be so high that it hurts. It has to be so high that the insurance carriers force the city to change its hiring policies." They settled for $2.6 million. It was the largest individual payout for a wrongful arrest in the city's history. But the money was just the headline. The real victory was in the consent decree. As part of the settlement, the city agreed to implement the Vance protocols. These new rules prohibited officers from demanding identification from people on private property without reasonable suspicion of a specific crime. It mandated that officers could not enter the curtilage of a home without a warrant or genuine emergency. It required that all stops be documented with a specific articulated reason beyond suspicious person. Officer Kyle Braden was fired. The termination letter was scathing, citing gross incompetence, racial bias, and conduct unbecoming an officer. He was stripped of his pension. The local district attorney, feeling the pressure, filed misdemeanor assault charges against him. He pled guilty to avoid jail time, receiving 2 years of probation. He would never carry a badge or a gun again. 6 months later, Judge Eleanor Vance sat on her porch. It was another Tuesday morning. The hydrangeas were blooming again, vibrant blue and purple heads nodding in the breeze. The check for $2.6 million had been deposited and immediately transferred. Eleanor had created the Vance Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing top-tier legal representation for indigent defendants facing civil rights abuses. She kept none of it. She sipped her coffee, watching the street. A police cruiser drove by slowly. The officer behind the wheel was young, perhaps Braden's age. He looked at the house. He saw Eleanor on the porch. He didn't slow down. He didn't stare. He kept his eyes forward and drove on, respecting the boundary between the state and the citizen. Eleanor set her cup down. The physical bruises on her wrists had healed, but the memory of the cold metal remained. She knew that her status had saved her. She knew that if she had been a young man in a hoodie or a woman without a law degree, the story might have ended in violence or a prison cell. That thought haunted her. It was why she had fought so hard. Not for herself, but for the next person standing on a porch holding a key waiting to be seen as a human being. This story should enrage you. It should also give you hope that the law, when wielded by those who understand it, can be a mighty sword against injustice. But the question remains. What happens when the victim isn't a federal judge? What happens when there are no cameras? What do you think was $2.6 million enough for the humiliation of being arrested at your own front door, or should the officer have faced prison time? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And please share this story. We need to remind the world that rights are not gifts from the government, they are ours and we must defend them. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.